After the Spirit speaks and calls Barnabas and Saul to be set apart for the work that would ultimately become the missionary journeys, the response comes. Verse 3. Then after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off. So the church fasts and prays and then participates in what we might call a commissioning, sends out Barnabas and Saul to the mission. Now, there's a couple points I want to make as we look at, again, a verse that might just be written off and say, yeah, they sent them off, cool. There's a little bit of wordplay in this verse, and it unlocked a spiritual depth for me. It says, the church lays their hands on them and then sends them off. Now, the Greek word for sent them off is apoluo, which is, if you've taken beginner Greek, you'll know that's the word that they have you parse. That's the example word that you go over and over and over, luo. So that word means to release, to loose something, to set free something. Now, I think Luke does this on purpose to say, it's kind of a picture, right? They laid hands on them, then they released. Hands on, hands off. There's a picture there. With that physical action comes a spiritual truth that we are to live our life with open hands. It's that reminder to us that God owns everything and that we may steward something for a time, but all things ultimately belong to Him and will return back to Him whenever He calls. Consider a practical example with our money. The Bible teaches God owns all wealth. Every dollar is His. The cattle on Thousand Hills are all His. And the money that we have is essentially to be viewed as on loan from Him. That's why we are called stewards of His money. And at the same time, that's why we should seek to be generous with our money, to give back to the Lord, whether that's tithing, offerings, or some specific cause the Lord lays on your heart. To live with open hands is to say, it wasn't mine to begin with. You called for it back. It's yours anyway. I'll give it back to you with a joyful heart, and when I do, it's worship for me. That's what it is. This is a mindset that will change your life. But look, money is just one example. The rubber met the road in Antioch, not with money, but with people. Set apart Barnabas and Saul and release them to me for my work. Do you think there might have been at least one unspiritual person in that church? One person that said, Lord, you can have any two you want, but can you leave Barnabas and Saul here? Can you take Bill and Joey, Lord? How about Frank and Randy, Lord? Can you please take them? I mean, you have to understand, Barnabas and Saul probably were not easy missionaries to send away. One had such a reputation for encouragement that it was his nickname, and the other literally wrote half of our New Testament. You think those guys are going to be missed at Antioch? Yeah. But the Spirit called for them, and they were His anyway. And guess what? That's why God raised up other leaders, Simeon, Lucius, Manaen, to stay and continue to preach and teach the flock at Antioch. Some are called to go, some are called to send, all are called to participate. You have to live with open hands and trust that when God calls someone away, He's going to be faithful to replace them. It's a healthy, Spirit-filled thing for a local church like Kirby Woods to say, God, you have free reign to call anybody to anything in this room. Nobody's off limits. Thinking like that, with an open hand mindset, is going to have two effects on a church. First, everyone is going to see themselves as available for God's mission, which is really healthy for you. And secondly, if everyone is available to be called away by God, then you're not going to build your church around one personality, and therefore you will not be absolutely crushed if God calls them away. We need to think like the football mantra, 3 deep at every position. If God calls our starter, our first stringer, next man up to the glory of God. And we need to make sure we're training our second and third stringers. Now, another thing I want you to see in this passage is that this church at Antioch, if they weren't living with open hands, could have also shuddered the Spirit's calling by saying, "But Lord, it just doesn't make sense to send out missionaries right now when there's so much work to be done in Antioch. Are we really in a position, Lord, to be sending missionaries? We're a church plant ourselves, remember? And we aren't exactly in a Christian culture." Church, you're going to hear this trope through the rest of your life, that it makes no sense to send out missionaries unless your homeland is completely Christianized. But church, that's not living with an open hand. It is God who calls, not us. He determines where his people will live and move and serve. He disperses the mission force how he wants to. It's Christ's great commission, not ours. He's the head of the church, not us. And secondly, here's a principle for your life that will ring true in many different areas. If you wait until something is perfect before you start, you'll probably never try anything. This is like that mindset. I probably did this mistake. This is that mindset of, well, we'll get married and we'll have kids when we're financially stable and everything in our life is settled down. Good luck starting a family at 55. Let me tell you, and some of y'all 55 are like, it doesn't get better, right? So let me tell you, we had to come to this conclusion as church planters in Colorado. We'd been sent out by Kirby Woods, and we were trying to reach Fort Collins with the gospel, desperately trying, and we were surrounded by lostness, and it was not a church culture, and people just didn't care about the church or anything like that. But at that same time, I felt very strongly that we needed an international missions partner and send teams to South Asia. And if anyone asked why a church plant that might not even survive in its own mission field would be concerned about lostness in India, I kind of had to develop a response to that. And it was this: if we don't set the culture and DNA of missions in our church early, it won't be present later when we need it. Missions is a muscle in the local church. It's counterintuitive to send your resources anywhere. It's even more counterintuitive when you feel that you cannot spare it at home. But how much more is that a statement of God's ownership over all things? Our calling is to live with open hands. God, you want our money? Here. You want our best and brightest? Here. Take Barnabas. That hurt. Losing an encourager stings. Take Saul. Best teacher I've ever heard in my entire life. Have him. Take him. The church at Antioch says, Lord, you gave us Barnabas and Saul when we needed them. They were a gift from you, and now you've called them back into your work. Praise the Lord.